So I've known Garth now almost 15 years.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And have been a huge fan of his writing and of him personally and of his lovely family. So I was really delighted and scared out of my mind to get the chance to do this. I do not normally get nervous for stuff like this. I have been a nervous wreck for days.
Perhaps you should introduce yourself.
Oh, right, yes, I'm sorry. I'm Barry Goldblatt. I'm a literary agent. I have my own agency, which I started in the year 2000, and originally doing almost exclusively children's and young adult, and now I do some adult as well. And yeah, Garth and I met in an elevator at World Fantasy in Madison, Wisconsin. It was a moment. No. It was. I was in the elevator and I recognized Garth, but I did not know him at all. And it was just the two of us in the elevator, so there was no one like to introduce us. And I didn't want to be this, raving fanboy in the elevator because that seems uncomfortable. But he looked over and he looked at my name tag and he goes, "Barry Goldblatt, oh, I read your blog." And I'm like, "I'm going to die right here, right now." So, it's been fun, sort of. Jeannie So, who used to be at HarperCollins, editor at HarperCollins, was, I think, the one who sent me my first Garth book.
Yeah, Jeannie worked on Lirael and Orson, and in fact she was a very important editor because I originally wrote Lirael and Orson as one book, as some of you may have figured out. It really is one enormous novel. And she advised me she thought it needed to be broken into two, and both halves expanded to some degree. So that's what happened. And when I first got that advice from Jenny, I was like, as always with editorial advice, you don't want because it means lots of work. And I got the email and I was like, oh, that's wrong, that's not right, grumble. But of course, I'm an ex-editor myself, so I knew not to respond immediately with a get out of town. I'm not doing that. I thought about it for a few days, and then slowly it crept over me that she was absolutely right, and I needed to do what she suggested. So yeah, Jeannie was an important editor for those books at that time, and she sent you the books, did she?
Yeah, I believe I think. I think Sabriel I'd found on my own, but I think she sent me Shade's Children, which, as you know, is one of my favorites. I annoy Garth all the time begging him for a sequel to Shade's Children, which he's not going to write, but that's okay.
Well, you never know. You never know.
Never say never,
Never
right?
say never. I have written a short story in that world, of course, which is possibly... Well, I'm not sure this is true, in fact, because other authors may have thought through entire stories whilst having a root canal. But that story I wrote in that world, I worked the whole thing out during a 3-hour session having a root canal, being very grateful for modern anaesthesia, because it didn't hurt. Everyone says root canal, worst, most painful thing, and I went to his great endodontist and no pain, and I got a story out of it as well. So there you go. Not that I'm recommending.
I was going to say you're not saying that you wish you could go through it all over again, right?
Don't go and have a root canal to get story ideas. That's probably a little bit excessive. Yeah.
So I wanted to sort of, I think your sort of history pre-writing, at least pre-publication, is really interesting because is there actually any job in publishing you didn't hold? I guess art design, you were never on that side.
Well, I was a production editor, so I did work on typography and page layout and so on. But it was all at the same time as a lot of my writing. I was still working in publishing when my first novel came out. I was briefly out of publishing, working in PR and marketing for technology companies when Sabriel came out, and I was back in publishing again as an agent part-time. So I've had sort of concurrent careers, working in many different publishing jobs, starting with bookselling, which was the first thing I did out of university, which I think is a fantastic apprenticeship for any kind of publishing job, and for writing too. Bookselling is a wonderful way to be exposed to many different books, and also to readers and how they find books and how they connect to books, and and also you get the discount. So that's pretty positive. Though in my case, the bookstore that I worked for, which was owned by a family company, And they actually knew the secret for how to make a lot of money in book selling, by the way, which I will impart to you, which is own the real estate. They actually owned the building that they had their store in. And when they eventually retired and they sold the building for a vast sum, and they closed the bookshop down, and I love the employer's discount, but I loved it a little bit too much, because when we were all laid off and we were given our severance pay, I still actually owed them money because I had so many books on account that it completely used up the severance, which at the time was kind of bad because I was relatively poor, but I've still got a lot of those books. So in the long run, it all worked out.
So a good investment overall.
Over time, yes, over time. So at that point, I was like, what have I done?
So there was I guess so Ragwitch came out, and there was what, about 6 years?
5 years. 4 years. Sorry, 4 years. 91. Beginning of 91, the Ragwitch came out, and then Sabriel in Australia in 1995, in America in 96. And I actually did write a book in between. This is possibly what you're leading up to. It's an interesting case, and it's worth telling, I think, because you never know what will happen with books. So I had, the Ragwitch was published in 91. It was my first novel. I was 24 when I sold it, and 26, I think, when it came out. And like a lot of first-time authors, and Barry as an agent, you're familiar with this mindset, I'm sure, is you think that the publication of your first novel is going to change everything. It's bound to be successful. You can give up your day job and all that sort of stuff if you want to. And I had, even though I worked in the business, I still had some of those thoughts. But if the Ragwitch was not an enormous success initially, it did fine. It got good reviews, it sold its first print run and so on, but it didn't set the world on fire. And I've been writing another book, whilst waiting for that to be published. And even though my first novel was published, I couldn't sell the second one. Because I thought this would just be automatic. I'll just write these books and they'll be published and smooth sailing. Very similar to my first short story sale, actually, where I sold my first short story when I was 19, and I thought, this is great, I'll write one of these every couple of weeks and lie in a hammock the rest of the time, sipping scotch, though I didn't drink scotch back then.
What scotch?
No, I could. I could lie in my hammock drinking water. But of course, the next 10 or 15 stories that I wrote, I couldn't sell anywhere. But that second book that I wrote, which I thought was a wonderful idea, I wrote a thriller about a manuscript. It was set in a publishing house. So the editor was a hero. No one's going to believe that. Well, who's drawn into this whole conspiracy thing, and there's a bunch of, it's going back a long time. The manuscript was on a 3.5-inch. This manuscript that held all these clues to this criminal conspiracy was on a 3.5-inch floppy disk. Wouldn't quite work these days. And I thought I would write the actual manuscript that the story is about. So it was a thriller about a manuscript, and the manuscript was a Regency romance, which I love. I love Regency romances, which was, in fact, the book Newt's Emerald. So I wrote a thriller about a manuscript, and every second chapter was the manuscript. And every publisher I sent it to, I thought this is great. I love thrillers, I love Regency romance, I love all kinds of books. And I sent it around, and every single publisher said, we really like the thriller, we really like the Regency romance, we really hate the two of them together. The thriller readers will hate the Regency romance and vice versa. And I was like, really? There's not more people like me who read both? No.
So no one give you a 2-book offer?
Yeah. Well, actually, no one wanted them, liked them enough that, and also I didn't want to break them apart at that point. I was like, I've written this, so that could have been the end of a short writing career. And in fact, a very good friend of mine said to me, well, Garth, guess you're just a one-book wonder. Thanks. So fueled up by that, I then went and wrote Sabriel was my next book. And in one of those long-term happy ending stories, several years ago, I looked back at that book that no one would buy. It was called The Clearinghouse. The Clearinghouse, including Newt's Emerald. And I looked at the Clearinghouse part, the thriller part, and 3.5-inch floppy disks, sort of very vague internet beginning stuff. It wasn't going to work. But Newt's Emerald, I thought, it still works, it's good. I'll fix it up, it'll take a couple of weeks, and 7 months to publish it. 3 months later, it took me much longer to rewrite it and expand it and so on, but it has since been published. So, 3 months, I already had most of the books, so it was, and I have the luxury of being a full-time writer, so which makes a huge difference. Though I should say I wrote most of my books, or half of them anyway, while I had very busy day jobs. Sabre, Lirella Pawson, Shade's Children, Seventh Tower, all of those were written whilst having day jobs. I mean, most authors through history have had day jobs. You don't need to be full-time. It's just a very nice luxury to have. So I always say that because I think these days a lot of people think you do need to be full-time, but that's not the case. And there's all kinds of reasons why you might not want to be either as well, in terms of sanity and so on.
And health insurance.
Well, in America, health insurance, absolutely. Many of my friends, many of my friends, have exactly that issue. They sell a lot of books, but health insurance in this country is so expensive, and so they keep a day job just for the health insurance. But sometimes it's for this, the social interaction. Writing's a very solitary business, so sometimes you need to come out of your cave and talk to other people. And if you haven't done it for a long time, you can forget how. So if I start becoming incoherent, you'll know I've been at home writing for too long.
We have a little scotch, so it's all right. So let's go back to young Garth. And when did the writing bug grab you? When did you start scribbling?
It's a good question. It's very early on, in fact. A few years ago, actually probably 7 or 8 years ago now, I was at a family Christmas, and my younger brother pulled out this little book which was about this big, and it had stories by Garth Nix written on it, on the front, with sort of shaky handwriting, and it was a collection of little stories, and I thought he'd actually manufactured, this is my younger brother, I thought he'd manufactured it just to make fun of me, as you would do as a sibling, He said, I found one of your early books. I'm like, yeah, right. And my parents said, oh, that's great, we haven't seen that for years. And I'd completely forgotten it, but it was a little book that I'd made, and it had 3 or 4 very early short stories in it, including one which I know by heart because I sometimes bring this little book along with me. I didn't today. I should have brought it, shouldn't I? I actually bring a facsimile, to be honest. I don't bring the real one. But it had one of my very first published short stories, self-published. I was getting in early, ahead of the trend. It was called The Coin Shower, and it goes like this. And normally, when I'm reading this out, I say, it's quite long, so be prepared. But I've memorised it, so it is quite long, but be prepared. The Coin Shower by Garth Nix. A boy went outside. It started raining coins. He picked them up. The end. And it's kind of interesting story because I quite like reading it out because it shows that I had some perception of the structure of stories. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end over 3 lines. It introduces a character. Something happens. There is actually a conclusion. It brings it to a point. And so I was, even at 6 or 7, however old I was thinking I'd obviously absorbed something of the structure of stories from all the reading that I was doing. It also shows a fascination with coins, which I've had all my life. So, it's quite interesting looking back at these artifacts sometimes and going, oh yeah, that was manifesting early.
It's also really interesting that it's a fantastical event about which nothing is commented.
Yes.
It just is, which is, I think, sort of a feature, I think, of a lot of your fiction. Your worlds are so complete, but it's just things happen because they happen. They're supposed to happen. It's what does happen. It's not that you're ever like, oh, and now we have to figure out why the magic has happened. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because, and I've come to realise this over time, that a sense of reality is very important for me in reading fantasy, but also in writing fantasy. I I want my stories, no matter how fantastical they are, to feel real, to feel as if they could be happening, you know, somewhere, somehow. And that was always kind of instinctive. I don't intellectualize it. Just if I can make it feel real to myself, it will feel real to the reader. And I think all successful fantasy does that, where you are somehow rooted in that imagined world. However you do it, and there's various different ways people do it. I think a lot of it is small detail, the small detail that builds up and draws you in. And because those small details feel real, and hopefully the people feel real, and whether the people are in fact people, or they're creatures, or you know, anthropomorphic characters, or whatever, if they all feel real, and all the small pieces feel real, yeah, it will create a totality that you know, you completely accept while you're reading that story. Even though afterwards you might think, you know, well, of course it's ludicrous, but it works somehow. I think if you can achieve that, that's what makes fantasy work.
I think that's one of the things I love about Sabriel and the rest of the Old Kingdom books. I mean, but particularly Sabriel, because you get there and the sense of a war-torn world is so vivid. You know, and then the transition from Earth in a portal, but not a portal, that's what convinced me. It was like this. I could walk into this tomorrow and be there. And it was those little details. I mean, I think the school details obviously came in, but it was just the grittiness of a war-torn environment was what really grabbed me.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad it worked. I mean, Sabriel's interesting. I mean, the sort of genesis of it's interesting in a sense because before I wrote Sabriel, I was thinking about writing a historical novel, a World War I historical novel. I'm always been very interested in military history, in World War I, amongst other things in particular, because it was so important for Australia and Australians. So many Australians were killed proportionally, you know, fighting, and not just in Gallipoli, which is the sort of famous thing everyone knows about, but actually many more were killed and wounded on the Western Front, including my great-great-uncle, who was killed 100 years ago this year, in September. And two of my grandparents on different sides, two of my great-grandfather, my great-great-uncles, and my grandfather on my mother's side all fought in the First World War, which is quite a common thing for many Australians because, again, proportionally, so many fought of the male population. So I wanted to write a World War I story, but I thought I wasn't technically able to at that time. I didn't feel I could write an historical novel because I doubted my ability to do that. And so I thought, you know, I love fantasy. I've already written one children's fantasy. I didn't think of Sabriel as a young adult fantasy, or as I just wanted to write a fantasy novel. And the World War I stuff, you know, crept into it with the whole perimeter facing the wall and so on. So, you know, it was one of the influences. And I guess that always happens. There's all kinds of things swirling around in your mind, and they join together. And sometimes they join together in a good way, and you end up with a good story that lasts. But a lot of that, you know, not just the perimeter, but I guess also the Broken Kingdom came from thinking about World War I and how you know, all those deaths, all those people killed, all you know, the broken landscape, all that stuff, you know, stems from that.
And so I know Sabriel and Liriel were basically, as you said, sort of one novel.
Liriel and Borson, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But it's just so, you know, the Old Kingdom has expanded, and you've continued returning there, and we have a new book coming this fall.
That's right. Yes.
But I mean, when you first said you didn't set out to write multiples. Did you sketch anything out? I mean, that was a standalone when you wrote it.
Yeah, Sabriel was entirely a standalone, and actually, almost as soon as it was published, you know, my publisher said, "Write another one, write another Old Kingdom book." And I said, "No, I don't want to. I've got this other story which I'm working on, which is the strongest story in my head, which was Shade's Children, which is a post-apocalyptic dystopian, you know, novel." I was way ahead of my time there. I missed the timing on that one. I should have done it 10 years later, obviously.
If you haven't read it, read it. It is dark and brutal and really amazing.
Thank you, Barry. Some people think it's a bit too dark and brutal, but you know, some shaking heads there. I'm glad to see that. And I guess the general publishing wisdom, publishers always want you to do whatever works again. And in the short term, it's often that is the best thing to do. But I do think in the long term, what works best overall, and sometimes it can be a very long term, and you might wait a long time for the benefits, is to write what you really want to, write the strongest stories in your head, and it should work out. So no, Sober Real was planned as, well, it wasn't planned, it was a standalone, it was its own thing. And then, the story of Lirael was sort of percolating through my head while I was finishing Shade's Children. So I wrote Lirael and a Porson as one book, and then worked on them over quite a long time to expand them into 2 books. And then for a long time I didn't go back, apart from a couple of short stories. And then Clariel, which is a prequel, so going back 600 years earlier, and that was 10 years after A Porson. And then the new book, the title was in fact revealed on Wednesday. It's called Golden Hand, and Golden Hand will be out in October this year. I'm very glad to say it was looking very dodgy for a while. It might be October next year, but I managed to get it in just under the wire. So it's going to be October, and it goes back to the main storyline of Lirael and A Porson. It picks up pretty much from the end of A Porson and overlaps with the events of the novella, The Creature in the Case. But it also, I needed to write Clariel in order to write Golden Hand, so I needed to go backwards in order to go forwards, as you do. And it's been very interesting going back to that world. One of the things I had to do was reread my own books, just to try and remind myself about many things which I'd forgotten, and many small details. And sometimes I'd think, I'll be working on Golden Hand and I'd think, I need to set this. Oh, I have set it up. I completely forgotten. Or my subconscious has done it years before. Some small part of my brain had set it up, put in that little hook I needed for 10 years later on. So, which is handy when that works.
So, did it surprise you that sort of the breakout hero of the Old Kingdom books is Mogget?
Well, I'm not sure Mogget is the breakout hero, but he's certainly a very popular character. You never know. You never know how things will work. Yeah, I'm glad people like that character, but they all, the disreputable dog is also a favourite character. People do seem to like my anthropomorphic characters, and actually, whenever I have them of any kind, and the monsters too sometimes. People say, I like your monsters. I'm thinking, good. Yeah. When they start talking about particular features of them, you're dwelling on that monster a bit too much. But, no, it's good. It is a compliment that, if you can create realistic creatures as well as realistic characters, I think that's, it's nice when they work. But yes, Mogget is a favourite. I think everyone likes a sarcastic cat who's not, in fact, a cat. What's not to like?
Does anybody in this room not know someone who has a cat now named Mogget? Anybody not? I feel like I've got at least a half a dozen friends.
There's a lot of cats. But of course, Mogget itself or Moggy is a very old word for a cat, and in fact, in one of Shakespeare's plays, there's a reference to a Mogget. So it's not a wholly new creation. I'm just reintroducing a name, I guess. But yeah, there's lots of cats called Mogget, and I'm very pleased. There's actually quite a lot of young women called Sober now, and some of them getting onwards for 10 into their teens.
It's got to be slightly strange.
It is. It's kind of weird. I mean, I hadn't really realised, but there's a tradition of names coming into the world via literature. I mean, Lorna didn't exist before Lorna Doone, for example, apparently. So, but yeah, it's great to have a name that's entered the world. There's a few Liraels, not as many. Sabriel is much more common. No boys called Touchstone. Or at least not as far as I know.
Get on that.
Yeah, though I do know someone who has a cockatoo called Touchstone. There we go.
So then also, it's not. guess not super recent, but you did Confusion of Princess, which was, you know,
Confusion of Princes was 2014,
Yeah, so
2013,
I was thinking,
2014.
is it 2 or 3 years? But
Yeah.
that was
yeah.
your return to science fiction, which you hadn't, at least book-wise, there may have been some short stories.
Yeah, I've written some short science fiction. Yeah, Confusion of Princes. I love science fiction as much as I love fantasy, but I just seem to write more fantasy. I'm not quite sure why that is. There's lots of things I would like to write. I love historical novels. I love thrillers. I love actually almost everything. But typically, when I start to work on a story, it nearly always tends to become fantasy, even if it doesn't start that way. I have written some. I've started to write realistic, contemporary fiction, typically in short stories, and it hardly ever stays realistic. It can stay contemporary, but there's always something strange creeps in. Some element of the fantastic always seems to weasel its way into my stories. It seems to be the way I'm made up. I've written very few straightforward pieces of, and even when I do write realistic fiction, it's often connected in some way, like my story, The Quiet Night, which is contemporary realistic, but it's about a live action role player. So it's still connecting back in, I guess.
So I'm assuming this, based on what you've talked about, you were a voracious reader, and you read sort of all over the place.
Absolutely. I am a voracious reader. I still read everything. I read, and I love reading all kinds of stuff. On the flight over, I actually read a book called No More Champagne, A History of Churchill's Money, which is fascinating. And it's actually fascinating if you're interested in publishing, because most of the way Winston Churchill made his living was by writing. And the whole book is about his various writing deals and also living at a very high level whilst thinking he was poor. The whole No More Champagne thing is cutting back from 300 bottles of champagne a month to 100 bottles of champagne a month. It's not exactly austerity measures, is it? But I love that kind of non-fiction. I love non-fiction about writing and publishing, about books, history in general. I love biographies, but I love all kinds of fiction. Obviously, fantasy and science fiction. I guess that's my first love. But historical fiction, thrillers, quite a lot of contemporary, literature as well. I have particular favourites. Lots of classic literature. I'm a huge fan of many classic writers. Jane Austen, not the Brontes so much, though. I love Austen much more than either of the Brontes. But Charles Dickens. I made the amazing discovery last year. I thought I'd read every Dickens novel, and I suddenly made the discovery that there was one that I'd missed somehow. It was like as if a new writer has suddenly released a new book. It's like, how can I have not read this? So there's many different things, and I like to reread too. I return to my favourite books. Lots of children's and YA books too, many of which were very influential upon me. Diana Wynne Jones, Robin McKinley, Peter Dickinson, who sadly died last month. I think a very big influence. It's interesting often reading these books again as an adult, because I love to reread, and I can read something I haven't read for 30 years, and in the middle of it I'll find something I think, oh yeah, okay, that's been an influence. That's where that was. I've either taken something from them semi-directly, or not in terms of the words, I hasten to say, but some idea, or I can see where that was a stepping off point for something that I've done in one of my books. Ursula Le Guin, Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, and many of the classics that you would expect were very, very influential and very important to me.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I felt like Confusion of Princess was a Zelazny homage in many ways.
Well, it's a Zelazny Heinlein, Philip Jose Farmer homage. Really, sort of like as a I wouldn't say a mashup because it's not that direct, but certainly they were all very big influences on those books. And I actually acknowledged that in the beginning, in the dedication. It's to those three authors in particular, but of course there's many others who are an influence upon that book in particular. Tolkien also a huge influence. I don't write about dwarves and elves and so on. Though I may, I'm saving that up. But I think reading The Lord of the Rings relatively, and in fact my mother and father read The Lord of the Rings to myself and my brothers when I was very young, and in fact going even further back, my mother read The Lord of the Rings when she was pregnant with me, so I kind of like absorbed it in utero. Maybe that's why I'm a fantasy writer, because she read The Lord of the Rings when she was pregnant. But I think, even though I don't, on a surface level, I may not appear to be hugely influenced by Tolkien, I think thematically enormously influenced by Tolkien. The Lord of the Rings in many ways is about the assumption of responsibility, doing what has to be done at a great cost. And a lot of my books are, and I've realised this because actually some people have told me this at various times. I thought, oh yeah, you're right. People, it's always interesting when people start writing PhDs about your work and so on. And sometimes it's, no, I was not thinking that at all. But sometimes they make you think about your work. And that connection, I think, is definitely true. A lot of my books are about the assumption of responsibility and the cost of doing so. And I think that's really important. That's also part of the reality, is that you can't take on these huge things and these quests without a personal cost. There will always be some cost eventually down the line.
Yeah, that's I think one of the things that very much attracted me to your work as I was reading. It's everybody's damaged. Everybody pays a price. No one walks away unscathed. And to me, that made it feel that much more real, even though it's fantastical. Obviously, I'm not going around ringing bells and playing with the dead, but.
You're not?
I'm not, unfortunately.
Well, that part is entirely true. That makes it sound very somber.
No, it's in its own way, at least for me, it's actually uplifting, because it is more, where I always have struggled with things that it's when everything's too perfect. When your hero or heroine is just, everything is easy. And I know some people really like that kind of entertainment, but for me, if there's no price paid, then what's the point?
Yeah, I love Happily Ever After, but I want Happily Ever After, with some other stuff going on.
Well, you want it to have been earned.
Yeah,
I don't think it just be a reward for character just because they walk through the story.
And it can never be an unalloyed Happy Ever After. There's always going to be stuff after as well. Unless, of course, you're dead and it's finished. But then, of course, in my books...
maybe not.
Or maybe not. That's right. In my books, that's not the finish, necessarily. So, I do think it's part of the internal reality of the stories. It's important to have that. But I do also want to have joy and happiness and at least a bittersweet ending. And actually, I'm probably a big fan of the bittersweet, but I think life often is. Things are not all, even in sunshine, it's not all happiness. There's always a chance of skin cancer. For Australians, anyway.
I think that goes pretty universally.
Yeah.
This hopefully will not bore everybody, but it's just something I've been thinking about. As long as we've known each other, we never really have talked about your time as an agent. And one of the things I was really curious about is who did you discover while you were agenting?
Well, probably one of my biggest discoveries is the young adult writer Jacqueline Moriarty, who
I did not know that.
Who Arthur Levine publishes. That was, discovering Jackie. That was one of those great things which you hope you have as an agent. I was at Curtis Brown, Australia, and we used to get many thousands of unsolicited manuscripts, which are often unkindly called the slush. I try and avoid that as a writer myself. I would not call it that, though that is in fact what everybody calls it.
Fertilizer?
No, I call it the unsolicited manuscripts. I'm going to go, and we used to stack them in the kitchen. So they'd be stacked, which was not used as a kitchen. We'd stack all these manuscripts in the kitchen, and there would be hundreds of them. You know, 2 weeks would go by and no one could look at them, and there'd be 200 or 300 there. And you know, every now and again, you know, some of the agents would get together and would all start going through them. And we had a kind of triage system where, you know, you look at the manuscript, you'd read the cover letter, read a couple of pages, and then it'd be either forget it, think about it, or read more. And most of the time, you just putting them aside. No. Not sure about this. I've got to. You know, I need to look at it a bit more, or it needs to go to somebody else to look at it a bit more. You know, maybe one of the other. This is more one of the other agents' cups of tea. And every now and again, you get one where you just keep reading. And Jackie Moriarty's first novel, Feeling Sorry for Celia. You know, I was going through no, maybe. And I got to her manuscript and I started reading it. And I was standing up, you know, sorting manuscripts in the kitchen. And 3 hours later, I'm still standing up, you know, reading the manuscript. And I finished it that afternoon. I rang her the next morning. I met her for lunch. I signed her up at lunchtime. I sent it out the next day. So I think it was Tuesday I read it. Wednesday I met Jackie. Thursday I sent it out. Friday I had a preemptive offer and sold it. So the book was picked up. So, you know, picked up in 3. She was agented, picked up as, you know, to be agented. Book was sold all in the space of 5 days. And
That's
then later on.
I mean, she's an amazing writer, so it doesn't surprise me.
And from a family of amazing writers. I mean, her sister Leanne Moriarty is a huge, you know, massive New York Times bestseller. Yeah, well, The Husband's Secret, like, you know, 2 years on the New York Times list. All of them write. They all write. So yeah, she's probably my biggest discovery, and some other people who have not travelled outside Australia, as it were, but did well. So and that's part of the fun. One of the things I liked most about being an agent was finding new authors, finding great work, and helping them connect with publishers and so on. I always really enjoyed that, and I enjoyed that when I was an editor as well, going further back, you know, trying to find people and so on. So yeah, so that's but Jackie would be my biggest discovery that you would know about. Aerobatic planes.
Just so, I mean, do you think that all of these experiences, you know, I mean, there are very few writers who come to the table with really basic understanding of publishing, let alone an actual in-depth understanding of publishing. Do you think that colors how you approach your writing?
I don't think it actually affects the writing because it affects the writing on one level in that I need to always write what I want to write. Sometimes knowing it is not, in fact, it's not the best commercial step. It's actually not. If I just wanted to sell books, it's not what I should have done next. But at least that's an informed decision. I know from my experience that, you know, I should probably just write another Old Kingdom book. I mean, that's what I should have done, you know, 8 years ago, technically, you know, from a pure selling books perspective. But in terms of a whole life and being a happy person, and I think a better writer, it's more important to write what I love. But being aware that, you know, I will get paid less for it. I will get a smaller advance for this kind of book than from that kind of book. It probably won't sell as many copies because it won't connect with that existing audience that's already there. So I guess it helps. I think actually in publishing in general, the more you know about it, the more you're able to make informed decisions, which is always good. You know, and I also know when things don't happen or do happen, often there are the reasons why. For many authors, there's a great mystery around it all. And when I was an agent, explaining stuff was, you know, a big part of the job. Just explaining how things happen, or trying to work out, you know, trying to ascertain what's been going on, you know, is part of it. But I think because I worked in publishing I was a bookseller and then I was an editor and so on. So I was always in publishing my whole adult life, really, as well as being a writer. I started writing seriously when I was 19. But I was, you know, even then, I knew enough that I would need to have a day job. I had to plan on having a day job, and so I needed to go and get a degree so I could get a better day job. So I did that. But I was writing all the time, and I also, I think, always was realistic, and I presumed that I would always need a day job. You know, for most authors, it doesn't. you don't make enough money. You can't make a living from it. You need to keep the day job, and that's what I expected to happen. And I was very fortunate that things have worked better than I ever expected. But you can't count on that. And you can't make it happen either. All you can do, is write the stuff. So I write what I love. Then having written it or having planned to write it, I work out how to make the most of it. And that's where the experience is very valuable. But also, I think it helps choosing who you work with as well, because your business partnerships are so important. The writing is one thing. What you do with it, having written, is where you really need, the best possible business partners. And it doesn't matter how you're publishing. I have a fantastic American agent, Jill Greenberg, agents in Australia and the United Kingdom, and publishers too, trying to work, because they're people, not just amorphous, faceless companies. So trying to work with, the best people is so important as well. And that's all part of, I've been helped by my background there, that I can work out who the best people are, perhaps more easily, because I can look beyond the immediate stuff that might be impressive to deeper things, because I understand the background. Yeah.
Well, I know you did a panel, I think yesterday, a fabulous Australia panel.
This morning.
Was it this morning? Okay.
Far too early this morning. 10 o'clock.
I'm actually, I've been fascinated, again, given the size and the population, the number of astonishingly good writers in Australia. It really is kind of remarkable. It also feels like a culture that actually celebrates and reveres writing and books and the creative effort.
Not enough. Never enough. And in fact, always sort of going backwards to some degree.
You had, in Australia, you had that weird, where basically all of the bookstores all went under all at the same time, which impacted things dramatically, which was, there especially, I know that's really forced a lot of changes.
Yeah, we had, the Borders collapse that you had, but unfortunately the venture capital firm that owned Borders also owned the other biggest chain in Australia, so they all went under. So we actually lost 20% of our bookshops in a month, essentially, which was an enormous hit for publishers and for authors, and very long ongoing problems. So that was a very bad time. I think, in terms of, I'm not sure that we do sort of punch over our weight, because I think if you looked at someone with an equivalent population of Australia, in say one of the states of the United States that has 25 million people, I don't know what that would be, but probably New York by itself, which would far outweigh the number of writers in Australia. But I think, but it's easy for you to spot them, as it were, because yes, that's an Australian, but I think in actual proportionally we're probably much the same as anywhere else with a similar population.
It's just my weird Australian writer obsessions.
Yeah. Well, why not? But I guess we do come from. I think we have the benefit of having both the long sort of English tradition, but greatly influenced by America post World War II. So in a way, we've got a sort of melange of the two major influences in English-speaking culture. We've kind of got a combination of both, plus our own sort of stuff.
I suspect it's I think it's that whole young country kind of vibe that makes sense. Yeah. You've also co-written quite a bit.
Yeah.
Mostly with Sean, right?
All with Sean.
Everything with Sean.
Everything. So. That's all relatively recent. I'd co-written some screenplays a long time ago. Unproduced screenplays, I hasten to add. I'm a successful novelist and a very unsuccessful screenwriter, because I've actually written quite a number of unproduced screenplays over the years, but you never know. If you write it, anything can happen. With Sean Williams, who's a good friend of mine, and we've written a series called Trouble Twisters together, and one of the Spirit Animals books, which is another scholastic children's series, and we've got a new series, which the first one comes out next year, which hasn't been announced yet, so I can't even mutter the title.
Is that process really different?
Yeah, it's different. Sean has done tons of co-writing. he's written tons of stuff. He wrote a whole series of books with a guy called Shane Dix, D-I-X, which kind of, the joke is he can only co-write with people whose names end in X. But no, he's actually co-written with some other people as well, thus disproving...
Did they change their names?
Yeah, he made them change. Just add an X on their name. So you'd be Barry Goldblatt X. But Sean and I met close to 20 years ago at a writers' festival. And I think almost ever since we were talking about it would be fun to write something together. Because writing is a solitary thing, and lots of writers think about co-writing because it just would be something different to do something with somebody else, not just always by yourself. And we were talking about it for years, and we kicked around various projects at different times before we eventually said we're going to bite the bullet. We're going to write a children's series of children's books together, which was Trouble Twisters, and that was fun. It was quite different, and of course the best part was the sitting around, often at conventions or writers' festivals. Would take a few hours, get some Guinness, and say, okay, let's work out what's the story, and we'd sit just chatting about the story, and then we'd continue that on Skype and phone and so on back home, because he lives in Adelaide, I live in Sydney. So we always have tremendous fun thinking up the stories, and in fact we've thought up all kinds of terrible stories together, which are fun but probably will never see the light of day. And then for Trouble Twisters, what we did was we worked out the story in a lot of detail, wrote a detailed chapter outline together, kicking it backwards and forwards, and then I wrote the first chapter, sort of setting the tone and so forth. And then Sean, who writes very, very fast, would write the first draft of all the rest of the book very swiftly. I mean, seriously swiftly, like in a month or 5 weeks or something. And then it'd come back to me and I'd rewrite it. And interestingly, I don't remember massively rewriting. I've just rewritten the first book of our new series, and I said to Sean, I've done a lot on this book, and it's 25,000 words out and 10,000 words in, and it's a lot more than Trouble Twisters. And say, are you kidding me? You've completely forgotten that I completely ripped Trouble Twisters one apart and rewrote it, but then he rewrites it. It goes backwards and forwards, and I just forgotten. And the end product is, if you look at a page, you can't tell in any given paragraph or line who wrote it. And in fact, I've said to him, I really like that. I like that line. I said, you wrote that. He says, no, I'm sure you did. We can't tell. And then actually for Spirit Animals, we actually reversed the process, where I actually wrote the first draft and then he did the first revision, just because of scheduling issues and so on. And you can't actually tell with that one either. So between the two of us, we create something that's not a Garth Nix book, it's not a Sean Williams book, it's some horrible conglomerate, a hybrid. I'm trying to think what that would be. It'd be like a Cigar Nilliams or something. We should actually work on a combined name, Cigar Nilliams.
Just go with Sean Nix, and then it's really simple.
Yeah, Sean Nix, that could work. Yeah.
So I know probably people are very interested in
Hey, Garth Williams.
no, that'll never fly.
Oh, it's been done.
So, I mean, since you mentioned screenplays, obviously something fans are always asking about is what's going on. Is there going to be an Old Kingdom movie?
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, that's such a funny world. Sabriel's been almost made 3 times, including last year, where we had a new deal which was basically finalised when the mini-major studio went into Chapter 11. But luckily we hadn't actually signed anything, because that would have been a nightmare. I mean, and as there is only one mini-major that went into Chapter 11, it was Relativity, you can tell. So that could have happened. It was set up in Australia once, when everything was, again, we actually were on the point of everything had been, all the legals had been done. We had these huge contracts to sign. It was all set up for the next day, and at about midnight I got a phone call that said a lawyer has raised a tax question over the funding, and it was all off again. So these things happen. And again, in 2009, it was set up with Plan B, Brad Pitt's company, and we had a director on board, a co-screenwriter. I was going to write the screenplay with an Oscar-nominated screenwriter, great writer, and I was very happy about all this. It looked very promising, and I went over to LA to do the rounds of all the studios, and we couldn't set it up. And it was very interesting. I found it very educational, going around all the different studios and pitching the film in this group of people. I was really just there. They were pitching it, but I got to sit on all the meetings. And one of the very interesting things at that time was invariably the question came, and including from the women who were the heads, or like second in charge of the studios, was when does the guy come in? What page do we get the protagonist come in? It's like, well, this whole film, this whole story is about Sabriel, and Touchstone, he's not the male protagonist. He is, a co-star of, but he's not. Like, can you bring him forward? Can he come in like page 3, not page 50? And I found that very interesting. In 2009, they thought they couldn't make a film with a female protagonist. They thought it wouldn't work. And I think that's changed a lot. At least I hope it's changed a lot. People tell me it has with the Hunger Games and so on. But that was quite an eye opener for me. That was a hurdle. That was a big hurdle. But obviously it wasn't the only hurdle. I think fantasy films, as opposed to television in general, are still not seen as something easy to do or easy to make work. Name, apart from The Lord of the Rings, a great fantasy film that has worked.
Well, Harry, but it's sort of a special case.
Well, that's a phenomenon.
Yeah.
So and there's been unfortunately, a lot of films based on YA children's fantasy that have not worked. I mean, often because they've been badly done, they've been badly adapted and so on. But you just never know. I did come via Los Angeles. I had some meetings. But who knows? It's as William Goldman, said in his book about screenwriting. Nobody knows anything, and I'm certainly in that category. Who knows? We'll see. I hope so. Yeah. I hope a good film is made. I'd rather have no film than a bad one. I mean, television's the other thing too. There's a lot more interest in the books and in the other books as well. Since Game of Thrones, much more interested in fantasy. And also the Old Kingdom books have a wall in them, just like Game of Thrones. That automatically makes them.
They're like, Lou, find the books with walls in them.
You got a fantasy book and it's got a wall in it? Yeah, we're there. No, I mean seriously, we've had several inquiries based upon this fact.
Wow. You just need to come up with a really good phrase. Winter is coming. Once you got that, you're.
Well, I've got winter as well. I mean, but
the bells are ringing.
The bells are ringing. Whom doth the bell toll? But who knows? It's one of those things where it's been so close numerous times that it's all fallen over. That is absolutely typical of that business. It's just huge investment and lots of things to go wrong. So I hope one day something good happens with those. And Shade's Children, actually. There's a number of people who've wanted to make Shade's Children and couldn't set it up. It's interesting who was attracted to Shade's Children. Both the two directors who've been interested in making it, both make horror films. So it's kind of interesting, So who knows? Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Garth.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Barry. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
A song about never saying never and never being told what you can or cannot do. This is one of us. A 1, 2, 3. Before I got to fighting, or when fighting got to me, I looked to find examples on the field of chivalry, and I saw mighty arms, much stronger than my arms could ever be. So I thought perhaps that field was not for me. But still I stayed and watched the fighting, till one figure stood apart, in armor newly fashioned, and a helm more pot than art. But each blow is thrown with honor and the lightness of the heart. So I took that step which soon became a start. 'Cause she was not the biggest fighter, nor one to raise a fuss, but I remember being proud that she was one of us. And we might never stand together in a shield wall side by side. Because of her I lift my sword with pride. She was ladylike and lively, not the type you would expect, with a braver heart than many and a slot shot to respect. And I guess she'd once decided this was where she'd like to be, and I thought if she could do it, why not me? 'Cause she was not the biggest fighter, nor one to raise a fight,